This video is intended for developers who develop extensions and web applications for Linnworks.net. In this specific video, we're going to demonstrate how you can embed your own web application inside Linnworks.net and how the authorization works. Alright, so let's have a look at the final result, what we want to achieve in this specific video. So what I want to do is I want to create a web application, which is the web page, and I want to embed this web application inside Linnworks.net interface. As you can see here, I've got my awesome app, and when the user clicks that application, it basically loads up my page, my web app, and it automatically logs people in, so it knows who opened this application up. As you can see, I know that this email address opened this up, and I've got their user ID, the Linnworks user ID. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to actually create a web application. Well, we need to create an application and register this application in apps.linnworks.net. So I'm going to go into apps.linnworks.net, log in, click on the applications, and what I need to do is I will have to create a new application. I'm going to call it auth demo. Authorization demo. Okay, so when the application is created, you will have application ID and application secret. Both of those things you need in order to let Linnworks.net authorization process know which application is trying to use the API. So I'm going to go to edit the application. Here I can put some descriptions. And the important bit is this one, which is called manifest. So this is actually describes what sort of application this is and how it gets inserted into, well, how it gets installed into Linnworks.net. For the time being, let's just leave this as is, just a default manifest, which actually tells us that there is only one module in this application, and this is going to be an external application, which means it's just something that uses the web API and nothing else. Okay, I'm going to go and save this, and that's about it. That's as far as we need to do. This is as much as we need to do to create a new app. So the next step for us is to actually create a web application itself, which will be sitting completely separately from Linnworks.net on our own servers, and it will do completely separate and different things to Linnworks.net itself. In my case, I'm going to develop the whole thing in Visual Studio in C#. So let's create a new project. Let's have it as an empty project and enable web forms for it. Okay, I've got the starting point for the for my web application here. What I can do is I'm going to go ahead and add a new web form to it. Just gonna call it index, so we've got something to start with. I think it's called default actually. Let's go ahead and put some stuff on this page. I'm just going to put the header, call this my awesome app. Then I want to put who logged in, email of the dude who logged in, and just going to be a label, and I think it will be just, let's put email. And what else do we need? I'm going to need Linnworks to display Linnworks ID. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a panel and call it error panel, just to display an error message in case we haven't, in case there wasn't a token provided and the authorization failed. Let's just keep it as simple as that, and let's start that up and see what it looks like. Okay, very simple. Okay, so the next step is to actually do the authorization. Let's actually have a look at the process flow, what happens to Linnworks.net and your application when a user opens up an external user interface within Linnworks.net. And we can demonstrate this with a simple diagram. Okay, so let's walk this through. So a user opens up an external user interface in Linnworks.net with this action. One-time authorization token will be generated and will be passed along to an external application URL. So there will be your application, then as a parameter within that application, there will be one-time authorization token passed to your application. Your application has to take this token, knowing its own application ID and application secret. It takes this temp token and uses the authorized by application call in a Linnworks Web API to actually authorize, well, to actually log into the Web API. This method itself will generate a session. Within that session, you will see the email address of the customer who opened up the application, and it will give you the Linnworks ID. So this is a unique identifier of a user within Linnworks system, and it will give you a authorization session token. So using this session token, you can actually call the web API. So normally you would save this session token in a local session storage, because this token can actually expire if it hasn't been used for about an hour or two. There's expiration limit. And also I wouldn't recommend calling the authorized by application method every time the page needs to make a web API call, because this authorized by application method is actually throttled. So first time you call this, it will log you in very quickly. If you call the same method for the same application within about a second, it will have a natural delay of about a second. The third time it will have a delay of about 5 seconds, and so on. So if you call this method to get a session token for every web API call you make, your application is going to be extremely slow, and after about 20 calls or so, it will actually completely reject any new requests. So ideally what you need to do is you need to authorize by application once for the whole application, save this session in the local session storage, and so that you know the session token ID, and use that session token ID for any further web API calls you're making within the application. Okay, so the next step is to make my application to be able to talk to Linnworks.net. By far the easiest way to do this is to use our SDK, which has got all the classes, all the methods already pre-built for you. So all you need to do is to basically reference this DLL within your app, and you'll be able to just make any sort of calls. So let's go ahead into apps.linnworks.net and go to GitHub. You'll be able to find the SDK here. Just download the zip file. Once you downloaded the SDK, you can go ahead and into .NET solution. By the way, there is a solution for PHP and JavaScript. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually compile the latest version of SDK. Okay, so it's compiled, and I will have the latest version of the SDK in the DLL, Linnworks API DLL, and Newtonsoft is just a supporting library that we need as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these files into my referencing folder, and now I can go and reference this newly compiled SDK in my solution. Okay, so now that I've got Linnworks API SDK connected, well, referenced in my application, it's very easy for me to actually interface with Linnworks.net Web API. Okay, let's go ahead now and create some code that will handle the token that will be sent by Linnworks.net when a user opens up the application. This will be sent in the query string of the URL when the application gets open, so I need to put some code in to take this query string, take the token out of it, and do the authorization using this token. So I'm going to place the code in here that checks whether the token is provided, and then if it's not, I'm just going to display an error message. We also need application ID and application secret to be stored somewhere within our application. Those are those things here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy them and paste them as a constants in our app. There they are. And the next thing is, once we've got the token sent from Linnworks.net, so we've got application ID, application secret, and we've got a token that is being sent to us by Linnworks.net when a user opens up your app. And remember that this token is just authorization token that will be used only one time. Okay, we can take this token and we can call authorized by application to create a session. So let's go ahead and call the method authorized by application, provide our application ID into it, application secret, and the new token that is being sent to us. Okay, so let's leave it as that to begin with. I'm going to set the breakpoint here, and what we need now is to test whether it actually works. So the easiest thing to do while you're in development is to create your app, as I already have done, and leave it as external application. So if I click here, this link here, open install URL, and preferably we need to open this in incognito mode, and then I log in for the application authorization using my developer account. So this is exactly the same account that I'm using for developing the app. I will see that I'm in developer mode right now, and I can choose a specific version of the application to install. I'm going to choose the development version. I'm going to head and install it, and I will receive an external application token here. So again, while we're in development mode, we don't have anywhere to deploy this application yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set that the starting URL will always start with this application token. Now let's go ahead and start our app, and on the start it will automatically open up the application and it will provide the authorization token. Now this authorization token that we have just generated is actually a permanent authorization token. When we embed the application in Linnworks.net, every time user opens that application, it will generate a temporary application authorization token that will be used only one time. Okay, but for the purposes of development, we can use a permanent one for the time being. So let's go ahead and execute the app, and we have our authorization token, and now we can call authorized by application to provide this authorization token into this method, and we should have a base session. So base session will have an email address of a customer of the user who logged in, some other information. ID, this one is actually a Linnworks unique identifier of a user. Then we also have the server that will be used for any further API calls. So the actual system will create a session on a specific set of servers. So in our case, it places this session in the EU1 environment. So this is based on the locale of the user. So it places the session as close to the user location as possible. And we also have this token here. So this is the token that we need to use for any further API calls that we're making within our application. Therefore, we need to take this token and save it in the local session. Okay. So the next step for us is to create some kind of session storage within our application. I'm going to go ahead and create a new class. Call it my session. In this class we have fields for storing our Web API Authorization Token server, which we'll be using to make calls to, email address of a user who logged in, and a Linnworks unique identifier. Once the application authorized, we will have a session token that we will need to save in our own application so we can use that token for further API calls. So I'm going to go ahead and use our newly created mySession class and put the newly generated session token into that, and we'll put this newly created session into our session storage. Okay, let's go ahead and modify our code a little bit to check that we don't have anything in this session, in the current session. Already, and only do the authorization if there's nothing in our session storage for the specific user. So I've modified the code to check if the token hasn't been provided and there is nothing in the local session storage. Then only then I will throw an error message saying the token is not provided, and also I will do the authorization only if the session storage is empty, so there's no current session in the application. So I'm going to go ahead and put some code in that will display email address and Linnworks user ID on to the user. Let's go ahead and run the application again. Let's see, there's nothing in the session at the moment, so we're going to go ahead and log in. Once it's logged in, we're going to create a new store session class that will contain the server that we're going to have to be making web API calls to, email address of customer, then authorization token. This is the session token, and Linnworks unique identifier. So, and we're going to store this session in our session storage for the application, and output the text on the screen. So this is the email address of the customer who logged in. And that's it. That's our awesome app that basically displays who opened up the application and their unique identifier. Now let's try and refresh this page just to see how it handles the reloads or any further calls to the application. So let's just step through this again. Is the authorization token provided? Yes, it is. Now we're checking if we have something in the session, and we do have something in session because we've created the session already. And now every further call to our web application, any action that the user is doing in the user interface, is going to be checking whether the session exists, and only if it doesn't exist, try to do the authorization. Now, because the session exists, we don't need to do the authorization again. We already have the application web API token that we will be needing to use for any web API calls to Linnworks.net. Okay, what we also need to do is we need to check whether the web API session is still alive on Linnworks.net side. As you know, once you authorize by application, it will give you the web API session token that you need to use to make the calls, but this session token might expire if it hasn't been used for an hour or two. So for example, if the user opened up the application, it generated this session, and you store this session for a longer time than Linnworks.net stores the application token, then when you try to make a web API call, it might come back saying it's unauthorized. So it's a good practice to, before you're making web API calls, to check whether the session is alive, or to have some kind of error handling, which will check that every time you make a web API call, if you get unauthorized error message, you do the authorization, and then only then you making the web API call. In our case, I'm going to go and add some code into my session class. It's a method that will check whether the session is still valid, and we could do this very easily in Linnworks SDK. In auth methods, there's a get session, and all you do is provide the session token into this method, and it will return null if the session is invalid, or an error message if there's something wrong with the session, or it will return exactly the same base class as we get when we authorize by application. So that will ensure that we still have the valid session. So I'm going to go ahead and modify the code, not only to check whether the session exists, but also check whether it's still valid. So whether to make sure that it hasn't expired on Linnworks.net side of things. Okay, we can do it very easily by converting the session storage into my session and then calling this newly created method that we've just put in place. So my application is pretty much ready for the deployment. So the application has to be on the web server somewhere, and it has to be on HTTPS protocol. Okay, I already have the publishing routine that will go and publish this application onto the web, and it will publish it into HTTPS, and then we have Linux itself has got linapp.com with the certificate already on it, where some developers can request to put their apps on. So alt demo, yeah, this is where I'm going to put my app to, and as you can see, the application is there, and it gives me the error message that the token has been provided because I haven't actually specified the token here. So for our application, what we can do, we can actually check that it's actually working by specifying our permanent token that we have used for the development. It's this one into the parameter, and it should just do exactly the same thing. It should just authorize using that permanent token. Okay, so now that the application has been deployed, we need to go to our apps Linnworks.net and change our manifest so that this application can be treated as an embedded user interface into Linnworks.net. Okay, so let's go ahead and edit the manifest. I've got the source code for the manifest here, and we're going to walk through it. So I'm going to paste this manifest in here. And what we need to know about this manifest, that it contains the type of the module, external user interface. Formatted name is something that user will see on the menu. The icon is a font awesome icon, and it has one parameter, an array of parameters, but specifically we're interested in URL parameter, where we specify the URL. This is where our application is stored, and we specify a token that will be generated and passed to our application when the user opens up this user interface. And remember, this is the one-time token, so it just gets generated, and the system will wait for about a minute for this token to be used, and then it expires the token. So we use this token to do the first authorization straight away when the application gets opened up. Alright, so we specify this URL that Linnworks.net will open up when the user opens your application. And so that's basically our application manifest. We can save this app now. Okay, now that we've modified our manifest to state that this is external user interface, I'm going to go ahead and install this app onto my account. So I'm going to log in, then select the currently developing version of the application, hit install, and that's it. I don't need this authorization token at all. So let's go ahead and log into Linnworks.net. And now we have my awesome app embedded into Linnworks.net. So when a user opens this application, what's going to happen? It will generate a temporary authorization token for the application. This authorization token passed in through that URL that we specified in the manifest to the application. It will use it to do the authorize by application to get a session token, and it will be using the session token to make any further web API calls.